Joining me is the former Permanent Special Representative for Climate Change, that's Sir David King. Sir David, good to have you with us this morning. Now, of course, with your experience, I guess what we're seeing right now in the UK was predicted, but it's worse than we thought, maybe.
It is worse than we expected, Cabe, and it's all coming sooner than we expected. I think we now do have an understanding of these extreme weather events. They're occurring, of course, right across Europe. It's not just Britain suffering both from drought and from extreme temperatures. And it's, I believe, driven by what's happening in the Arctic Circle region, where ice has been melting much more rapidly than was predicted. And now, during the three polar summer months, which is right now, much of the Arctic Ocean is exposed to sunlight. As before, it was covered with ice, so it was reflected back into space. So that heating of the Arctic Circle region is the cause of what we're looking at. The reason can be explained in some detail, but let me just say, we have now got to anticipate this kind of weather going into the future, and if anything, getting worse. The combination of a drought and the risk of fires with the heat wave is very severe. And I would say to people, yes, it's lovely to have a nice hot day to get out in the sun, but please don't spend much time in the sun. Heat stress is awful. If you're in the sun, your local temperature is well above 35, 36 degrees centigrade, and your body temperature should not exceed 37. So getting rid of that excess heat becomes a real problem. And if you're sweating, in other words, it's not, your sweat isn't evaporating, it means your sweat isn't acting in the way it should do to cool your body down. You need to be in a cool breeze in the sunshine, or you need to have a fan on you so that you're blowing the sweat away, and as it evaporates, it cools your body down.
So, David, are there enough measures being put in place by governments to try and help us deal with the heat waves that we're going to be facing, as you rightly point out, for the foreseeable future?
I think what we need is a coordinated plan from government to manage, to adapt our societies and our position against these challenges. And no, we don't have this plan in place. It is a plan that is vitally necessary, and it would be very, very important to see that the government, when it gets over this election business, and it is frightening that we're in some state of stasis at the moment without actions coming through from the very top. But the plan needs to begin to be put in place so that next summer we are actually in a state of preparedness. And there is a bullet for the incoming government to bite, and that is, it is public services that are needed to be improved, whether it's hospital staff, healthcare staff, fire services. All of these have been severely underfunded over the last decade, and we need to see urgently a refunding of our public services.
Well, apart from an increase in funding, which of course many people will want and appreciate that is necessary, what else can the government be doing at this stage?
Well, at this stage, it's really a bit too late. The government needs to be putting out warnings, and I hear you doing that very well. The fires are the biggest risk we're faced with, and this is an extreme problem. Of course, the other problem is that faced with a drought, we have water shortages, and we all need to now be learning to treat water as a precious commodity. So I think the problems are coupled together: shortage of water, drought, fires, and high temperatures. Much more needs to be done in order to bring us to a much more secure place.
And so, David, are you hearing anything from the current contenders to lead the Conservative Party that gives you encouragement that they take the crisis we're facing seriously?
Well, frankly, no. And that is a matter of concern. It would be so important to have the questions asked of any incoming Prime Minister. What actions will you take to reduce the impacts of climate change? And frankly, there's been no discussion of this at all, which is extremely disappointing and I would say also extremely worrying.
Now, there's been talk, of course, of removing those green levies. Just to describe for us what you think that would do. They say they're going to do it temporarily to try and ease the pain that some households are facing. But what do you think that would do? And what kind of message does it send if we start going back on our targets to reduce our carbon emissions?
Okay, your question implies the answer, doesn't it? In the sense that quite clearly green levies are one way of us preparing for climate change. We need to see that, for example, in the face of the current crisis driven by the war in Europe around Ukraine, we are seeing energy prices rise very, very rapidly. Now, the right reaction is not to invest in fossil fuels to see if we can bring the price down by putting more fossil fuels into the marketplace. That would take far too long. We've got a crisis that's here now. How do we manage it today? And the way to manage it is to increase energy efficiency, to ask people to really look after their use of energy sources, air conditioning and so on. We need to see that shops do keep their doors closed when they've got air conditioning on. We need to see a whole series of measures to save energy going forward in time. And these measures are being taken in places like Italy and France. And of course, we should be doing exactly the same. All of us across Europe are faced with the similar crises, very, very similar, and we need to take actions right across the board.
Now, those measures, of course, to try and make sure that homes are better prepared to deal not just with the heat, but also with the cold that we're facing, that costs a lot of money. Do you have suggestions for where the government can find that money? Because that is obviously a big issue at this moment.
A very big issue at this moment is where do we find the money? This is the sixth wealthiest country in the world, and we're talking about where do we find the money. Now, of course, we have run up a big deficit as a result of the actions over COVID-19. And I would say the actions in the sense that we didn't get it all right in the early phase, and that's when the disease spread very rapidly, and we had to move into the shutdown across the country. Now, that debt is still sitting there. But could we raise money by, for example, raising the taxes on the oil companies? The oil companies are simply increasing their profits because their profits are measured by the price that we pay, not by the volume of fuel that we consume. And so as the prices go up, their profits go up, we certainly need to be taxing them and taxing them heavily. But of course, there's bigger issues out there. What about all of the tax havens, offshore tax havens, where people who have wealth are able to put their money and therefore live in Britain without paying tax in Britain? I think these extremely wealthy people need to be stepping up to the mark and paying their share of the taxes. So I think I'm not an economist, but it's very clear even to me that we have a system that doesn't manage to keep the poorer people, the people even quite high up on the pay scale, these people in a decent standard of living. We've got a complete polarization between the very wealthiest at the top and the very poorest at the bottom.
OK, Sir David King, the head of the Climate Crisis Advisory Group, thanks very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.